properties and actions, thus maintaining it in existence. Now, you guys know who Jordan Peterson is. We've had a unique opportunity watching Jordan Peterson actually go from an atheist to a Christian. And I know it was probably maybe 3 years ago, I saw an interview with Jordan, and he was talking to Dave Rubin and one other guy. I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about like their idea of God, and Jordan was trying to articulate this. He said, my idea of God, he wasn't Christian at the time, but he was toying with this concept in his mind. And basically, he had never read anything about chiropractic philosophy, but what he described was universal intelligence. Now, we understand universal intelligence a little bit better than back in the 20s because we have artificial intelligence, which is an algorithm or a program that can be used to solve a problem or give us, an output. We stick in all the information, it spits out the answer. That's kind of what universal intelligence is. If you think about it, it is a program, an algorithm that every possible scenario can be fed into, and it's going to give us the laws and the interactions between all these forces and particles. Okay, because we talk about what the field, okay, the universal field, and how that information, that program has to be programmed somewhere. It's actually programmed into the field. The field is the conduit between intelligence and then force. So all the forces of nature, like the strong and weak interactions between atoms, the strong and weak nuclear interactions, the molecular, the forces of gravity, all those forces are actually coded for in that universal field. Okay, so this, remember, was back in probably in the 1920s, when they were still working off what we called the static infinite universe model. It wasn't expanding; it just had always been, and it was always in the size and shape that we assumed it to be. Now, advances in technology with telescopes and such, we now know that's not the case. But the principles, again, if you understand the principles, it should still hold true regardless of that information. The only reason I bring that up is because at that time, BJ kind of crossed those lines between philosophy and religion, and he really spoke about universal intelligence as if it were God. And that was kind of what Jordan was looking at. He was like, I think it might be this. It might be this universal intelligence, this AI, this artificial intelligence, or a program that runs the universe, okay, and runs all the particles and dictates the laws of those interactions. Okay, so that's where we started. Go ahead. And in the chiropractic textbook, because he was thinking it was God at that time, he said the definition of that universal intelligence is that it is the infinite intelligence that is the source of everything, okay, in the universe. The infinite intelligence pervading all space, all matter, creates, governs all things, both material and immaterial. So material meaning those forces like gravity, for example, those strong nuclear forces inside the nucleus of an atom, for example. All those forces were governed and coordinated by that program, that universal intelligence. But he wasn't looking at it as a program at the time. Okay, he was thinking this probably is God. Go ahead. Is it God? Well, is it? Can it be equated with the first cause? And in chiropractic philosophy, we talk about the source, okay? Because chiropractic philosophy is a philosophy of things natural, not meaning like not drugs. It means not of a supernatural nature. So when we cross that line from, you know, universal intelligence into calling it God, we've stepped over what is traditionally chiropractic philosophy. And we like to do that, but in strict chiropractic philosophy terms, they set it up so that if we're wrong about this being God, if some, you know, telescope is invented down the road that can see the universe and it turns out that it's not infinite, it's just really, really, really big, and there's a difference between infinite and really, really, really big, then we want our philosophy to still hold true. So they came up with source, big S source, okay? So that if the universe isn't infinite, then universal intelligence, that program doesn't have to be infinite. It isn't infinite. It's just contained within the universe, okay? And we then have a source. And again, I would think in terms of a program, that universal intelligence, that artificial intelligence, or that universal intelligence, we call that program, would have a programmer or a source, okay? So source in chiropractic philosophy is defined as the power that supplies the universe with intelligence, force, and matter, everything. He said it's another name for universal intelligence. At that time, it was because he was working on that static, infinite universe model, okay? So we were concerned with the source of all forces and matter. Could it be equal to God? Well, now we understand, no, there is a source. We would call that God, but universal intelligence is not its own source. The source of universal intelligence is the programmer, okay? So the interesting thing about, like, when they talked about the Big Bang being a singularity and then everything exploded into being from that singularity, there is no explanation as to why it occurs. It marks the edge of the universe in time. There is no before, okay, because time and space in Einstein's model, space-time was one thing, all right? Not two separate things, space and time. It's one space-time, one thing, 4 dimensions, okay? So when we think about that, their description of the Big Bang is true creation out of nothing, okay? And that was a Cambridge scholar that actually said that. So when we look at our major premise then in terms of source and then it being a program, the universal intelligence, it says, is in all matter, okay? So where is it not? Well, by that definition, it would be everywhere that there's not matter, okay? Because it would be only confined to matter. But they didn't have the knowledge, again, at that time of fields. So the field is kind of that line between matter and force, all right? Go ahead. So we'll get into that in just a second, but I want to take you through this exercise, okay? Go ahead. Oh, that's so dark. Go ahead. Yeah, keep going. Oh, go back. Sorry. Okay, so this quote said, space or a place is nothing, not even space, unless it's at the heart a figure stands. So when we talk about that singularity, that single photon of light, let's say, if in your mind, like you can be floating in a void, okay? But now you have to remove yourself from that void and only like your spirit, which doesn't have any content, but it's context, okay? So no content, nothing physical within this void of nothingness, all right? And when God said, I am, to Moses, identifying himself as I am, is a statement of eternal context. It's not I am this, it's I am, okay? So in that void, people always like to do these mental exercises like, well, okay, If it was a void, if there was nothing, but God was in it, then it wasn't a void, because God, yes, but in the unmanifest state, the Godhead we call, unmanifest, there is no content. It's the content, the eternal context. And then God says, let there be, and boom, let there be light. In order to say and create light, he has to know all the specifics of what is light, okay? So that whole program for how does light act, what is it, how does it interact with other particles, when you break everything, matter included, everything down into its smallest subcomponents, you break that atom down into subatomic particles, and then you break those down. At the heart of everything, it's light. It's a field. It's vibration, basically. There is no matter there. It's all energy. It's all a field, and it just the frequency that field vibrates at is what gives that matter, or even that force, its properties. Okay, so it's all programmed into that field. Go ahead. And I think this is just where I talk about what I was just saying, that when God says, I am, it's a statement of eternal context. So there isn't really a problem with the void, there being nothing, creation out of nothing, because when we look at God in the Godhead, the unmanifest, there is no content. There's context, that eternal context, that which gives meaning to everything. So go ahead. So when I'm looking at I cut off part of it. Everything that had to come into existence at the same time when God said, let there be light, right? Universal intelligence, okay? And as soon as a single particle exists, actually, as soon as that field exists, now there are 4 dimensions, because we have 3 spatial dimensions, and then as we move through that field, we have time, okay? So all of those things, all those 4 dimensions of space-time, universal intelligence, the universe, and whatever else I had up there, that all comes into being at the same time, okay? Go ahead. Man, so I was looking for a template that we could use because in chiropractic philosophy, they really haven't updated the lexicon or even the understanding of these terms. They're still teaching the 1920s version of this philosophy, and the philosophy, the principles hold true, but our understanding of how they hold true has changed because our understanding of the universe has changed, okay? So I was trying in our class to come up with, it was a PhD class in the philosophy, to come up with this template that we could use to support different adjectives and still remain intelligence, okay? Because we don't want to make intelligence into a being, like an intelligent being. We're not talking about a being like God, who we describe as intelligence. In that case, intelligence would be an adjective, right? But if we talk about artificial intelligence, intelligence there is a noun. It's something, intel, like you think about the Central Intelligence Agency. That's the version of intelligence. It's laws, it's specifications, metaphysical specifications. That's what a law is. It's programmed into that field, all those specifications. And that's what gives that law its properties. That's what gives matter or those forces their properties. So I'm working on this, and I'm going to use you guys' brain again. So when we try to come up with this template for just intelligence, if we say it's the ability to acquire and apply content towards a mission, okay, does that work? Is it accurate to think of universal intelligence as an algorithm or a program, a set of specifications to be followed in problem solving. I think that's accurate. So I said, I think universal intelligence can be described as metaphysical specifications. It is all the laws that we observe in nature, the law of gravity, for example. Somebody, if you look at like a video game world, all right, there's gravity in that world. Well, somebody had to program that. Okay, somebody had to program this entire universe. If you like Breath of the Wild, which Casey loves Breath of the Wild. So if you think about that video game, somebody had to program the metaphysical specifications of that universe, how gravity works, how fast you can move through that, time and space. All of those things had to be specifically programmed into that computer, that program. And that's metaphysical. It's not something that you're going to look in that computer and see it. It's in the cloud. It's in that field. Okay, go ahead. So, like I talked about, when we break down everything, matter, it's all fields. It's all made up of light. When God said, "Let there be light," God uses light the way most artists, would use like oil paints or clays. He works in light. Okay, so light waves, particles, fields. We know that light, like I said, can be in three different phases. We can see it in a wave phase, we can see it in a particle phase, or we can see it in fields. In reality, it's probably all fields, but when we look at it, it'll change sometimes. Okay, so go ahead. So if we look at universal intelligence and we try to use the knowledge of fields that we're talking about that they didn't have back in the 20s, I think we might just alter the wording of that main premise to be something like this. There's a field associated with every particle which continually gives matter, those particles, it gives matter its properties and maintains it in existence as such. Okay, so again, that's pretty deep, like philosophical thinking, and we're looking at a principle, and we're not saying that's wrong. Most of the time, when there's like an update in science, it's not saying this theory was completely wrong, we got to go back to the drawing board. It's just refining an already existing principle that we can observe in nature. Like when you look at Newton's idea of gravity, it becomes Einstein, or Einstein's idea of gravity actually becomes Newton's idea of gravity when you're looking at big, masses. It's only when you have to break it down into smaller and smaller particles that you need something more specific. So it's not saying Newton's wrong, it's saying that works in all of these scenarios, but for these scenarios where bodies are very small and energies are very high, we need something specific to add on to that to make it work. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. We're not saying the philosophy is wrong. We're saying that it needs to be specific to our knowledge of the universe. And now, like I said, as opposed to back in the 20s, we know that the universe isn't infinite, it's expanding. We know about fields, okay? And they didn't have that knowledge like we do back, when this was written. So we're just updating a few things. So universal intelligence is facts, okay? Any fact that you can think of, like I said, had to be programmed into that field in order for us to be able to observe gravity as a fact, okay? So it's a fact that each point in a field has a specific value and probability. And these values give each field its unique characteristics. So there's fields like electromagnetic fields, there's gravitational fields, there's boson fields, which actually, when another particle interacts with that boson field, it gives it mass, okay? So all these specific facts underlie everything in the universe, and that field, okay, is where it's programmed into. That field is a force. And forces can be either potential, where they're not really moving, it's just sitting there as a potential force, or it can be a kinetic force, okay? So in the universe, we can think of three things. We've got fact, act, and matter, or in fact would be the intelligence, act would be the force, okay, and matter would be the hard stuff. So we've got fields, force, matter, or fact, act, matter. Okay, go ahead. So I try to come up with like a a diagram for how this information has to flow in the universe. Okay, so up here, top left, UI, that's universal intelligence. When we're talking about like dimensions, it's above time. Okay, it's beyond time because that's actually programming what time is and all the specifics for time, right? So that dimension we would think of as beyond the four spatial and time dimensions. We'll just call it the fifth dimension. Hit that button. Hit it again. Hit it again. That's the fifth dimension. You remember the fifth dimension, the band? Remember that? No? Age of Aquarius? That was the fifth dimension. It was a joke and only the old guys got it. So, so universal intelligence, that's metaphysical specifications. If you're going to take any lexicon words away from this tonight, metaphysical specifications. It's not in the physical, okay? It's beyond the physical, and it's the laws, the program that's written down and programmed into that field. Well, the field exists not just in space, you know, there's really no matter to it, right? That three-dimensional matter. So it's something that exists in the fourth dimension, in time. It exists in time, not necessarily space. So we have that universal field that exists in time, and that universal intelligence, okay, the program comes down and is incorporated into that field, and then that gives us forces. So from a field, we have forces like gravity, for example, the electromagnetic force. Those things, the strong and weak, you know, interactions between particles and nuclear interactions within the nucleus, all of those things are forces that come from a field, all right? And then from that, we get, based on the interaction between those fields, we get matter. So we get that three-dimensional matter, okay? So fields in a vacuum state where there is no matter in it, it still exists. There's nothing three-dimensional there, but it still exists in time, all right? We just call it a vacuum state. It's not a true vacuum because there is a field. When you think about space and they say the vacuum of space, meaning there's nothing there, there is something there. There's a field. If there wasn't, there's no conduit for us to be able to see distant stars. There's nothing for it to travel through, okay, to our eye. If it was just a vacuum, but there's, you know, surrounding our solar system or surrounding our galaxy, there's a bubble of a field, well, we wouldn't see beyond our solar system or beyond our galaxy. We would see out to that bubble, and then it would bounce back off of that actual vacuum, okay? So I know that was too much, but when you think about how does matter come from a simple field at a vacuum state, if you think of, I put this upside down, a smooth surface of water, all right? You introduce a force into that water and it vibrates. What'll happen, depending on the frequency of vibration, is particles will form. A droplet will actually pop up from that steady, you know, vacuum state of zero, and a particle will pop into existence. And that actually happens in those fields when we observe at vacuum state, you know, all of a sudden they'll get excited. You know, it's programmed into that field at what frequency it's going to get excited, and boom, a particle pops out when we're looking for it. A particle pops out of that field. Okay, so the point here, if you go ahead, is that that intelligence, that program has to underlie everything that we're seeing in existence. Otherwise, it simply wouldn't exist. So that metaphysical dimension where that intelligence or that program exists, that's where the facts are found, okay? A fact is something immutable, just like a rock, but it's not physical. It's the foundation of the whole reality, everything that we see, and then those 4 space and time dimensions are kind of stacked on top of that, but that has to exist in order for all the rest of those things to exist. The program has to be there. The specifications have to be there. It has to be programmed in order for us to have those laws and those forces, okay? So the principles that we went over were the main premise, okay? We talk about fact, we talk about act, and we talk about matter. So the principles, the function of intelligence is to create force, right? So it's programmed into that field, and then from that field we get forces. The function of force then, the function of force is to unite intelligence and matter, all right? So those particles then are created because that program was written into a field which then vibrated at a certain frequency, which then interacted with another field, and the laws that were written there dictate that those 2 interactions are going to create X particle. So that's what, if I was going to give the long definition there of that function of force, that's how it actually happens, okay? And again, we didn't understand that in 1924, but matter then, the function of matter is simply to express that force. And in chiropractic, we talk about like universal life, simply that something exists, basically, is the expression of intelligence through matter, all right? So that intelligence code into the field creates a force, interacts